After relentless rain, the wet weather has eased for now, but vulnerable areas along Sydney's western rivers are again on high alert. Evacuations and warnings are in place and water levels have not yet reached their predicted peak. It has residents of the Hawkesbury and Nepean regions anxiously preparing for what could be their fourth flood this year. Joining us live now is Federal Member for Macquarie, Susan Templeman. Susan, thank you for joining us. How is the community and the people in the Hawkesbury and Nepean areas, how are they holding up?
Well, the weather today gives a respite from what might come later in the week, but right now we are flooding. There is flooding at North Richmond, up in St Albans in the McDonald Valley, Lower Portland, everywhere along the river. The river has gone beyond its banks. And I think there's sometimes a misconception that when people hear, minor flooding, they think, it's not so bad. But the word flood, the flooding bit is the thing that makes you realise that the water is in places where it really shouldn't be. And while we've been incredibly grateful that the bridges, the main bridges at Windsor and Richmond didn't close, there are still a lot of people isolated, out of their homes and with properties inundated with water.
People in that area have had to go through this time and time again. Are you hearing from residents that some are thinking about abandoning their homes, or farmers are losing crops and they are possibly going to be losing millions of dollars this year because of the wet weather events? What are you hearing from residents? Are most willing to stick this out, or are some wanting to flee?
It's different this year from last year's floods. When it happens once, people go, that's okay, we can get back, we can replant, we can do this again, we can refit out our homes. But you're right, people are starting to question, do they want to be here? Do they want to go through this again? And there's a mix of sadness and grief and anger about what people are facing and the support that they've had to recover. So I was talking with vegetable farmers yesterday who are going, we don't know whether to plant a crop or not, and the one we've planted we may well have just lost. There are turf farmers who know that if they don't get a crop in the ground within the next few weeks, they won't get a winter crop of turf next year. So these are long-term decisions for turf farmers. I was also in a street where about 6 or 7 houses are now empty for sale or for rent, or simply empty because people just can't face going back in them and doing the work that needs to be done to get them back to a livable standard. So these are issues that are really profound for the individuals affected. We're conscious that we haven't had the scale of flood that, for instance, the North Coast had, but it's happened again and again, and it really is, there is a need to look at the Hawkesbury, come together and think of the long-term strategy for people, because anxiety is through the roof.
Are there two challenges there at the moment, the reality of flooding, but also the emotional toll that this is taking on residents and the anxiety that they are suffering?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to describe. Most people probably thought the rain was a bit of an annoyance over the weekend, but here in the Hawkesbury, it completely dominated people's lives. Kids weren't sure whether bridges would be open for them to get back to school today. Parents weren't sure if they could get to work, or businesses weren't sure if their employees would be able to make it to work. So you've got these multiple factors of anxiety, and that's for people who aren't actually flooding. Those who are flooded are looking at the water on their property and thinking, when will it go? And with the predictions of more rain later in the week, we just don't know how long that water will sit where it is.
Premier Dominic Perrottet has committed to raising the Warragamba Dam wall, but that's not the only flood mitigation measure that you would like to see. You'd also like to lower the dam's maximum water level. How would that help?
Yeah, there's the issue of any potential raising of the dam, people really think is just so far off that their brains aren't particularly inspired by that. What people have been asking for months and months and months is an immediate lowering of the existing water level in the dam. Given the dam is at capacity and overflowing pretty constantly in the last few months. But what they recognise is that in between those peaks, you could let a bit more out, give a bit more airspace so there was some buffer. What everyone recognises is that it's a complicated thing to do, and it needs to be done at the same time as alternate water sources for Sydney are developed, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you've got a gap in the dam but then suddenly dry weather. So there's a real understanding that it's complex, but the state government has ruled it out completely, and that is making people very angry. I have had so many emails in the last few days about why didn't the state government, knowing that this was coming, knowing we're in another La Nina, why didn't they do something to provide us with a bit of airspace in the dam for a bit of peace of mind?
Certainly such a tough, no doubt frustrating time for so many who are impacted by these floods. Susan Templeman, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.